The Greatlance. If you have followed this series for the past year, you know exactly what I'm going to say. But before I say that word, I need to provide some context. The Greatlance hasn't always been the same Greatlance. Enter 2016. There were actually quite a lot of videos representing the Greatlance at launch. A few of the more notable entries, Inferno Plus, Prod, and even Scott Junn made a video detailing precisely how to use the said weapon.
So let's just get this out of the way right at the beginning. The Greatlance is not a very good weapon at all.
And this was the undeniable truth for the Greatlance. It was slow, had no hyper armor, and was outclassed by every other spear in the game. All things considered, there was little reason to use the Greatlance until the next year came. March 23rd, 2017. Patch 1.3 came out. In this patch, the Greatlance saw 2 buffs. Its moves increased in speed across the board, and poise was added to its two-handed moveset. It received similar poise health to that of maces, which isn't bad at all, especially when you compare the different poise weapons of similar speed. Right after, a decent amount of content was made all over YouTube about this new post-patch Greatlance. Mr. I Won't Forget did a video, Chase the Bro made a couple, and even Prod came back to talk about it some more. And yet, through all of their videos, what they highlighted about their weapon only scratched the surface of its potential. In the summer of 2017, a Korean player known as BBanishing took the Greatlance into an international tournament and got to 2nd place, using both the Greatlance and an offhand cestus. It was such an impressive showing for the weapon, surprising many at what the weapon could do in the right hands. There was also a Reddit post made by the user TheQuestionableYarn describing how to optimize the Greatlance during the same summer. 2018 knocked on the door, and Adam Barker himself made 2 separate Greatlance videos showing off both insane combo numbers and extensive tips on how to use it properly. Alas, just as quickly as the Greatlance appeared, it disappeared, back into backlog obscurity. The tournament footage, the Reddit post, and Adam's videos had little exposure. For the few of those who wanted to show off the weapon, it was though there were even fewer who actually wanted to see it. Rest assured, it is reasonable why most are dissuaded from using it. The weapon is rather unwieldy and unorthodox, more so than any other weapon in the game. While yes, the weapon art charge can combo out of an R1 for one of the game's most damaging combos, you have to actually hit the opponent with an R1 first. You could then argue that the Gale's Greatsword, Split Leaf, Crucifix of the Mad King all have far more damaging combos from faster and safer R1s, overshadowing the Greatlance's combo altogether. If every move on the Greatlance is considered to be a bad one, why would we use the Greatlance at all? Well, unfortunately for you, You find the Greatlance in Lothric Castle, specifically at the Dragon Barracks bonfire. Go to the stairs, up and to the left, away from the dragon-guarded bridge, and there you will find a Lothric knight kneeling over a body, holding the weapon you're looking for. The Greatlance is supposedly a Pike-class weapon. Sure, there are 4 other weapons in this class: the Lothric Long Spear, the Ringed Knight Spear, the Lothric War Banner, and the Pike. The only quality that separates these 4 pikes from other spears is that their one-handed moveset is slightly slower than the spear's one-handed moveset. Otherwise, two-handed pikes are identical to two-handed spears in speed, sometimes beating them outright in range. There could be further differences in their moveset, but they're just basically longer, heavier spears. However, it's in that regard that I think that the Greatlance shouldn't be considered a pike at all. It shares few similarities to other pikes, save for its running and rolling R1s, but this is where the similarities end. From here on out, the Greatlance has a unique moveset, from its R1 thrust to its R2 charge. It's also the only pike to have poise during its two-handed attacks. And it's this unique moveset that is often misused and misunderstood. And this is the part where ganks throughout Lothric will start using this weapon for a solid week, maybe? I see y'all. Don't think I don't. And I'm here to tell you that if you see gankers use the Greatlance in any capacity, it's actually putting them at a disadvantage. They're trading katana and spear running R1s for a running R1 that deadlocks them into one direction. The Greatlance's neutral R1s can also be rolled on reaction and side-strafed, not like a curved sword, straight sword, or dagger. It has low poise, so they're losing out on ultras, curved greatswords, or just plain greatswords. If they use the Greatlance, they are playing at a disadvantage. Well, as far as disadvantages go in a gank anyway. Every weakness this weapon may have can be easily nullified by having a buddy cover your mistakes with their own attacks. Regardless, a word to those invaders that might see this weapon more in the wild: there is a vast difference between someone who knows how to use it and someone who doesn't. Good luck! This may shock you to hear, but don't treat the R1 like it's your bread and butter attack. The R1 can be parried on reaction if somebody already has a parry shield out. Likewise, your opponent can either roll around you for a backstab attempt, or, latency permitting, sprint around you to your back. In fact, the neutral R1 should only really be used for when you know you can hit it, either through a whiff, a roll catch, a heal punish, or a trade. What you should be more concerned with using in the meantime is your R2 and the one-handed shield poke. This doesn't mean that you should fully disregard R1s, but that the R1 shouldn't be the first attack for every situation, like with every other weapon in the game. The R2 can surprise you with how quickly its poise frames activate, not to mention that its tracking is better than an R1, especially when an enemy is close and trying to go around you. An uncharged R2 can be turned rather easily, just before the actual charge comes out. You can also further charge the R2 if your opponent is attempting to roll into or past you. If you unlock in the beginning of the R2 and aim it to where they're going to roll, you will most certainly catch them. Lock back on once the charge commits to secure the rest of the hitboxes, and you have the full R2 attack. Here's another important tidbit. The two-handed R2 becomes unparryable once you fully charge it. There are quite a few players not privy to this fact, and to see them tank the R2 will always be a delight to see. Aside from this gimmick that will most certainly fade over time, the R2 is also perfect for wake-ups. If they attempt to panic roll, you'll catch them. If they attempt to wake-up parry, you'll fully charge the R2 and catch them. Throwing out an R2 can also be just the ticket to keep on the right amount of aggression. Meanwhile, the one-handed shield poke is just as useful. You pull off a shield poke when you hold block with either a shield or a weapon that permits a block with L1, and then you press R1 while holding the block. This is characteristic of almost all weapons that can poke. Thrusting swords, spears, pikes, they all have this attack. It's fast and can even trade. It will drain a lot of your stamina though. Depending on what you're blocking with, you may even receive noticeable chip damage if you do get a trade. Due to the Greatlance's length, a shield poke can punish whiffs at a considerable distance. Don't go throwing this out willy-nilly though. It does lock you into place and it has a tight hitbox. An opponent can easily side-strafe this attack and punish you accordingly if they know it's coming. A shield poke ought to be used when the opponent expects your much slower neutral R1, or when they're attempting an attack themselves. Land a successful poke and you might just throw them off their rhythm. Use this to your advantage. Speaking of which, the rolling and running R1s are not to be underestimated. The rolling R1, both two-handed and one-handed, are fast attacks, all things considered. The length of the Greatlance makes these moves even more dangerous due to how fast they come out. Now, while the rolling R1s don't do a lot of damage, that's not necessarily their purpose. You can throw out a rolling R1 when you need it for pressure, defense, anytime you feel your opponent isn't respecting the distance between you. They will get hit by it, but be careful not to spam rolling attacks. You'll probably get parried, or worse. The running R1, on the other hand, is a very peculiar move. It comes out instantaneously and has several hitboxes in its animation. The biggest catch-22 is that it only travels in a single line once you've thrown it out. It's not a move you should use when an opponent is already in the motion of strafing from left to right, as you will most definitely miss and suffer the consequences. The running R1 ought to be used when you know an opponent is either standing relatively still, perhaps taking a chug of Estus, or trying to retreat. This way you can either punish a heal attempt or catch a backwards roll. There is also a hitbox outside of the Greatlance itself and a part of your body. Oftentimes you might find yourself interrupting an opponent before they could get into poise frames, and instead knock them around a bit like you're tackling them. Practice your aim with the running R1 and know when to throw one out. Obviously it's not like the typical spear or katana where you can throw running R1s out to your heart's content, because you will run out of stamina and you will have a bad time. Otherwise, running R1 has a rather uncanny ability to carry whoever it hits a far distance from where you first collide with them. This move can be incredibly useful, especially if you want to knock someone off a roof or a rafter in spectacular fashion. Now let's talk about the weapon art. Despite what appears to just be a normal spear charge, it does have a special property to it. One that Scott Junn found all that time ago, but ended up getting banned from the Dark Souls 3 subreddit for discussing it, as if it was game-breaking. Oh, if only we knew back then what this game would become. Anyways, in the first frames of the weapon art, you can spin your character around 180 and effectively sweep the charge in a horizontal motion. You face the opposite direction that you want to aim the weapon art in, and then turn yourself around and do a half circle motion with the left stick. You will hit everything the charge sweeps across in your way. In practicality, you could use this tech, if we were to call it that, on Wake Up as well. All those hitboxes ought to knock off somebody who just procced their tears. While Scott tried to call this tech an Italian word, I think in his memory, I want to call this the Junn sweep, just so that we can remember him by. For the creative minds out there, I'm sure you'll find some flashy applications for this. Show off to the few remaining hollows still waiting for Elden Ring's release date. If you haven't already caught on, this weapon's greatest weakness involves opponents circling around it. But you can use this downside of the weapon to your advantage. Those who attempt to circle you can actually be countered with a little circling yourself. If you have a shield or a weapon that can block, hold block and proceed to counter circle strafe around the opponent if you see them doing this. When you've successfully approached their back, hold that block and press R1. One of two things will happen. You either get a backstab attempt, or if you've missed the back, will simply go for a shield poke instead. Either is favorable for you. A shield poke will land a hit while also tanking any potential attack from their end if they whiffed their backstab. Also, a backstab attempt will either land true or simply hit them with the entirety of the Greatlance. This will end up doing more damage than the standard shield poke alone. You can also use counter crit play in other interesting ways as well. Say an opponent tries to roll past your neutral R1s, this is where the Project Goofs of the world will shine. You can either backstab their backstab attempt, or hit them with an R2, or of course hit them with an R1 into a weapon art. Backstab attempts have never been more unsafe. We tax those here in Lothric for every penny. And tax evasion is theft. And yes, the R1 combos into the weapon art. It does a lot of damage for a fast attack, and it sends folks flying on top of it. I know some of you nerds can't wait to get your hands on this just to do R1 into weapon art until the last of your brain cells disappear, but if you've been watching the video up to this point, you would know that there's much more to this weapon besides just this combo. Besides that point, the Greatlance, when one-handed, can't combo into its own R1s or into a weapon art. Weird, huh? It can combo into a shield poke though. You turtles out there will appreciate that. Also, if you haven't already noticed from the footage, I've been using an offhand weapon alongside my main hand Greatlance. This not only allows for a more aggressive playstyle, which I prefer with my weapons, you can even combo a one-handed R1 of the Greatlance into those faster offhand weapons, provided they're long enough to reach. Thrusting swords, straight swords, or axes can be used to complement the slower moveset of the Greatlance, all while having it at the ready. And believe it or not, the horse hoof ring also has a role to play here. While the horse hoof does have the ability to do more stamina damage on blocking shields with a kick, if you do land a kick on someone who's not blocking, they'll be stunned for long enough that you could pull off an R2, an R1, or even a weapon art. All from a kick. This combo potential is also possible with other weapons, even slower weapons like ultra greatswords. Alas, you can only combo a single R1 from those bigger weapons. The fact that a kick can go into a Greatlance charge demanded that I included the possibility. Use it at your own discretion though. This is more of a gimmick than a certified tool to rest your entire strategy on. One last note about the Greatlance's combo potential is what happens when you equip it in the offhand. The recovery time after an attack is significantly reduced. So much so that you can combo almost every main hand attack in the game. Check out Angeluso's video on the topic. There's an extensive list of combos with it. You could very well put a faster weapon in the main hand that has a more universal and quicker running attack. It would stray the user further away from using the Greatlance itself, but it is an option nonetheless for those who prefer unorthodox builds. From what you have seen and heard, if you are tempted to try this weapon out, let's go over how to build the Greatlance. The Greatlance itself requires some hardy stat investment at 21 strength and 16 dexterity. In order to see this weapon truly shine, you'll have to sink some levels into your build for sure. Strength, dexterity, and especially endurance, because this weapon is a stamina hog. For the purposes of this video, I went to SL72, leveled my strength to the soft cap of 40, and then infused the Greatlance with heavy. The footage you have seen, and will continue to see, is mostly from that specific build. This isn't the only way to build the Greatlance though. If you were to go to the meta level of 125, you can go 60 strength and infuse the Greatlance with heavy. This gives the Greatlance the most AR possible. If you equip the Leo ring, your counter thrust damage will hurt severely. You could then use an offhand heavy cestus similar to BBanishing to smack opponents who get too close to you, or if you aren't too comfortable with backstab fishing so you just want to shoo them away instead. One of the biggest issues that you'll find with this weapon is fighting turtles. It will be one of your hardest mashups, especially if you don't have something with chip damage. Considering this, you could also use a quality build and go 40-40. Infusing the Greatlance with Refined will still net you strong AR numbers, but now you can easily slot a number of fast weapons into your build like an S-Stock or a Corvian Great Knife and have those weapons do sizable damage as well. Throwing knives will also be a fine addition to our collection, perfect for slowly whittling down the enemy or for finishing somebody off. And yes, the possibility of using a 30-int, 30 Faith Dark build with a Dark-infused Greatlance is still on the table. You won't be able to get Leo Ring counters, but there will be extra chip damage through shields if that's a priority for you. However, your opponent can reduce your dark damage easily by popping black bug pellets and putting on the dark stoneplate ring. On the other hand, there's no bug pellets for a Leo Ring thrust. Keep that in mind, my friends. Keep that in mind. Let me wrap up this video with this. Scott Jun was right all this time. Simplicity is often the most efficient way to win. If it's long, fast, and above all, safe, why use anything else? Why use an R2 on a two-handed curved sword? Or why use a long sword over a Lothric Knight sword? And why would you use the Greatlance over virtually any other spear or pike in the game? And I'll admit, the Greatlance was one of the toughest weapons for me to comprehend, especially considering the past weapons I've used in this series. The mentality you have to have behind the weapon is one that's so far off the beaten meta path. It's no wonder so many were surprised by its tournament appearance 2 years ago. But once I did get a hang of it, it was a blast to play with. The entire weapon itself just reeks of off-meta. But it's that singular quality that makes it enjoyable to see. Whereas some turn to complex maneuvers and tech, for me it was the pursuit of finding a build or a weapon that hasn't been explored yet. And often the builds and weapons that got tossed to the side were the ones that weren't simple or required much more practice in order to understand. Sure, the added complexity doesn't necessarily help my chances at winning the Dark Souls 3 Evo, but that extra challenge, for me, makes this game what it ought to be: fun. And just for clarity's sake, this doesn't mean that I'm saying the Greatlance is one of the best weapons of all time. What I'm trying to say is that the Greatlance didn't deserve most of the neglect and disregard that it's received since its post-patch fixes. The Greatlance is, well, for lack of a better word, that's about it for me. Look at the calendar. It's a new decade, y'all. I don't know what these next 10 years might bring, but if any of you out there are anxious, unsure, or scared about what's coming, remember that you made it this far. Every day that you wake up is another day already past you. Every moment you're still breathing is another moment where you're carrying a message to pass on to someone else, to anyone else. The easy part is to keep climbing. The hardest part is you gotta do it every day. And if you think you're alone, just look around. We're all making this journey together.